spay and neuter your pets. So welcome to another video from theplayersaid.com. My name's Alexander.
And I'm Grant.
And I'm Sam London.
We're here with Sam London at SDHC, which is San Diego HistCon. And if you've not been here, this is a convention that's held annually, or kind of semi-annually, but out here in San Diego, kind of once a year.
They do one on the East Coast, right?
Yeah.
And then they do virtual conventions.
Right.
But this is the cool one. If you've watched our channel, you've seen Sam last year. We played Firefight Tactical, and we actually played the Microverse as well. This year we played a game whose name has changed very recently.
Yeah.
I think the working name currently is
Common Sense.
which I presume is after John Payne's Tract. And this is
Thomas Paine.
Thomas Paine. There you go.
I was debating whether to correct you.
No, you can always correct. It's totally fine. So this is we played a full game of this. I know you've been demoing it a lot. Have people been playing the full games of it?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
This was the third full game we played through today.
And that played in about 2.5 hours once you kind of taught?
Yeah. So that, about including the teach is about 2.5 hours.
Okay.
And we played through what 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years.
Yeah, we ended in 81.
And so this is an American Revolutionary War game. You play the whole thing at a strategic level, but it is a trick-taking game. And
That's becoming pretty common.
it's kind of in
more
vogue
common.
right now. Yeah, this is our third one of the year, I think.
Yes.
Which is, I don't think we played a single one before that.
Yeah.
But
Even normal trick-taking games?
Well,
we
we're talking-
don't play a lot of trick-taking.
Wow, okay. I didn't know that.
No, yeah.
I've played euchre my entire life.
Okay.
But
I'm from England. I don't know what that
Yeah.
is.
trick-taking war games or historical games,
Yeah.
no. Didn't we play that one from Hollandspiel? There was one that was a trick-taking game.
I'm sure there was, but I
Yeah,
don't remember
anyway.
it. But so this was a really interesting game. I know you actually had this, at least the
Last
map for it last year.
Yeah, it was. I debuted this just kind of bringing around conventions early last year.
And it's been in development for, how long have you been designing and kind of working on this one?
Since probably about 2 years.
Okay. And we played it kind of start to finish, and it was really, really enjoyable. Lots to think about in this game. Because the trick-taking part of it, fairly intuitive, with different suits and trumps. And then if you win it, you've got all these different actions or options that you have. But then prosecuting the actual campaigns and the strategy, there is a lot to consider. And all of the things, the hallmarks that I think are AmRev games, where you're considering supply, the movement is laborious, you have to worry about winter attrition, and the very asymmetrical types of warfare that are going on, and kind of the subtypes of warfare, with even like the raids and the different types of units that appear on the board, was all very rich and things that felt I was right at home with an AmRev game. So that was really awesome.
And like we discussed, while it was challenging, I think it is very period appropriate.
Yeah.
Yes.
We've played a couple AmRev games, more operational, Hex Encounter. I'm thinking of Almost a Miracle.
Yes.
And how difficult that was to move, keep units in supply, and get enough to really do much.
Yeah.
So it definitely, I think you've captured that in the difficulty with movement and combating and that kind of thing.
There's some cards that get around that, but
Yeah, but
Right.
that's, I'm playing this, and it's the similar feelings that I get, even from something like Liberty or Death, where it's like, I do all this stuff, but it's like, you gotta go home. You can't just sit out in the middle of the wilderness. Or Supply Lines of the American Revolution, where you have to literally drag your supply along in that one, but it's such a concern that you're like, I'm playing cards to build my orange supply, because that's the thing
As
that I
the
have to
British.
care
As
about.
the British,
Yeah.
Because I don't care about that.
No.
Right? We're living off the land.
Yes.
You guys are having to.
But those are the things that I've always enjoyed in the AmRev games, because I think designers like yourself have really like made a showcase of those aspects of it, where I think, in some of the periods or different kind of theaters of war, don't worry about those things. It's just kind of like, I move my guys around and we fight. I love those additional like structures within the games that have done that. So can you walk us through kind of how and where you got to, what is a track, right? It's a really clean system, but how you're able to build and balance that within this.
That is a very complicated question.
Yes.
So
And it's very late.
Yes.
when I was trying to do this, I came about it because I knew I wanted to make the game quite asymmetrical, and so I was coming at it first. So I'm hoping this becomes a series that revolves around that will to fight track, which I imagine we'll talk about in a little bit.
Yes.
But so the design came from so the whole idea is everybody is going to lose their willingness to continue the war from different sources. Why are both parties fighting this war? And then if I'm coming from that, everything was kind of built on top of that structure. And so then that came into, okay, well, how are they actually recruiting soldiers to fight? It's very different. They're fighting for different reasons. They're coming from different places. And then, of course, how are they battling? The battle aspects of the American Revolution have been done to death. Like everybody, as you're saying, you've seen them all over the place. And so then I almost didn't require writing how exactly it works in this game because it's so well established. And so rather than thinking, what are the mechanics I want to have in here, it was how do they fasten onto the framework. And so, in some respects, it was actually quite easy. It was more time. I spent more time thinking of the kind of ancillary aspects of the asymmetry than I did about the standard combat. There's some exceptions to that. Siege warfare, it took a little bit more time to get that to the point I wanted it to be. Naval sieges included, but then, yeah, for the most part, I wanted it to be a game where, at least on the combat front, it was simple, it was accessible, but it would also feel familiar.
Yeah, and it definitely succeeds at that. I guess, so we'll talk about the will to fight track here in a second, but I wanted you mentioned here the ancillary differences and the asymmetry. So much of that is built into the totally different card decks that they have, which was really, really fun to play with, because the British deck had a higher ceiling and the colonial deck had a lower floor, and the way that the trumps work, you trump with lower numbers if you can, and there's lots of things within that, but the decks felt so different, and how we were playing was totally different, and the actions on them and the special events that you get with those, there was so much baked into those where you're like, oh, I got the card again that allows me to do this stuff, and if I'm winning with that, well, it gives me like the different raids and this stuff, so I might focus on this part of it. And I thought that was such a really neat journey, that just playing through a campaign and going through that deck of cards put you through again and again.
So that was actually very special for me to develop because my best, oldest, dearest friend's father is a history teacher who's obsessed with Amrev. And so when I was working on this, I kind of knew the really obvious things that everybody expects to see in Amrev games. But I've had multiple meetings with him where I told him I was working on this game. I was like, what am I missing? Like, what are things that really need to be in here? And he and I he didn't help me with mechanics, but he just came with like, oh, you need to find something to model this. And so it was so much fun to find mechanics to match that. And then the other piece there, and now I really wish I remember the name of this book. There was a book that came out 2 years ago that was the only book I did so much work trying to find a book on specifically the economic strain on Britain of the Revolution, and there was nothing until like it had just come out when I started working on the game, and that also was a lot of inspiration specifically for the British and how that deck came together.
So let's talk about the Will to Fight, because we're saying this is Volume 1 in the Will to Fight series.
Hopefully.
That's what we're calling it.
If people dig it.
We're speaking it into the universe, so hopefully people like it and that can happen. So what that looks like on the board is this track where we have the Colonials at one end and the British on the other, and as you take losses, as raids happen, at different bits and pieces of the game, you literally lose the will to continue prosecuting the war. And the game ends when those two things meet.
Yes.
And they don't necessarily meet in the center. They meet where they meet on this pendulum. So if one side's kind of destroying the other, they might meet way over here, which is kind of what happened with us. Mm-hmm. And so you have a larger portion of points in addition to, geographical ones as well.
It's pretty common where you'll have the British player and they're dominating on keys, but their will to fight is in the toilet, and so it doesn't matter. Like
Yeah.
it's just like, okay, we just need it out of this war, you guys. It doesn't, you can have your country now.
So, how do you come up with that specific system? Because I think a lot of people would just be like, you get some victory points, which is fine. But this is something that was very fluid and different, and was a really interesting aspect to this.
So that was the very first thing when I was trying to approach this. I'm the type of designer, there are exceptions, but pretty much every game I design with the idea of it being a system first and then what I can build on top of it. And so I was trying to think of what I wanted to do. I wanted to try make an entry into strategic level gaming. And what am I going to do that's different here? And I was thinking, well, different sides fight wars for different reasons, and that they can be tremendously asymmetrical. And so here, the obvious one, which I explained to you, but I'll mention again for the camera, is that the colonies, they were very much about, this is our land, we're going to keep this land, and they were motivated to fight for that. The British didn't care about that at all. It was just almost an ego thing.
Yeah, put down the rebellion.
Right, and so for them, it's much more about, well, how expensive is this damn war going to be? Like, how much longer are we going to have to fight this thing? And so once I came up with, well, just because their motivations are different doesn't mean they can't be directly related. Then came up, because I was thinking about things like the scoring mechanism for Ark Nova or Rajas of the Ganges, if you ever saw that, which have a similar converging track. I was like, that would be really interesting as a war game thing. And as soon as I thought of that, then it became, how much asymmetry can I pump into the modifications to that track? Yeah, that became the basis.
I also liked how this directly affected the number of units that you could recruit with that recruit action.
Yeah.
I thought that was a neat touch, because I think I made the comment, everybody loves a winner, right? So when you're doing well, everybody wants to join.
Yeah.
But when you start to get down here and you're only recruiting 2 units, that makes a big difference.
Yeah,
It really does.
It does. It adds up. And then it's not exactly uncommon for the British to lose so much will to fight that they can't even get Tories to come out anymore.
Got it. Is that at this point?
That's at that point.
Got it. So you were one.
Which we were pretty close
Yeah,
to.
pretty close.
Not that I hardly ever levied them anyway.
Yeah.
They were.
I mean, you really didn't have to. You had the Phillipsburg Proclamation gave you so many Tories on like one card. You were pretty good to
You
go.
got 10, I think.
Yeah, I think it was, which was nice. But yeah, I thought that aspect of it was really neat, because whilst, printed on the board, it's a track with 2 markers. There is so much, like you said, baked into what that is, and it affects how you play. And to me, it does highlight those, the driving forces behind why the war's being fought, because that's directly tied to your victory points. And I thought that was kind of one of the standout parts of it. So I look forward to not only this, but other iterations in this system of what else can those things represent and what can they highlight. Because I think what you've done here is showcase something a little bit different from all the other AmRef games, which I think is really awesome.
So, speaking way, way too far ahead, but I don't see any reason to hide anything I'm doing. I'm working on the Vietnam version of this, which goes to 4, and that has, since it's 4 players, it has an interrelated will to fight track. And so the asymmetries that come in there's a lot that you can do with that. And it's the spine of the system, but there's just so many, it's a rich thing.
So with those 4 players, I'm assuming you have like the U.S. and then the ARVN.
Yeah, so it's like your Fire in the Lake, your ARVN NVA, Viet Cong, and the U.S., but unlike how it was there, it's pure teams here. So it's the Viet Cong and the NVA win or lose together.
Yeah.
So it's much more of like a partners style trick-taking game. Yeah.
The use of trick-taking here, why did you feel that was what you wanted to build this around? I remember when you said that, I was like, oh, trick-taking? We did not know that.
No.
So I really did not like trick-taking for a very, very long time. And then I suddenly fell in love with trick-taking about 4 years ago. You can ask my home game group. They hate trick-taking, and it's like every day I'm like, hey, I found this really cool. And, they're small box games, and they're like, all right, we'll humor you for 2 plays, and then we're done. We don't want to see any more trick-taking for a month. But I fell in love with, because there's so much strategy that even take all the things in this game out and just talk about any trick taking. Think hearts.
Yeah,
There's so
agreed.
much strategy that just comes in by nature of trick taking.
Sure.
That it's really easy to kind of build things on top of that. The other reason I went with that, not necessarily specific to trick taking, but I knew I wanted to make it a CDG where every card was unique. And so when I was thinking about that and how it would relate to trick taking, so the thing in this game is that the higher value cards, which are much more likely to win tricks, have much weaker abilities and actions, whereas the lower cards, which are much, much, much harder to win tricks with, have very strong abilities and lots of actions. And so once I came up with that framework, I couldn't get away from it.
Yeah, that's like a classic CDG thing,
Yeah.
but it really stuck out in this way. Like, oh, I feel like I'm winning all these tricks to get one action.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't even need to use that action.
Yeah.
Okay, but then if you could win with some of those low ones, you'd
Felt
be
really
loaded up
good.
with like a really great event and a bunch of supply and 3 like moves or 3 battles, and you could just do so much with those things.
It was actually
Common Sense that I won.
Common Sense. No, you didn't resolve Common Sense.
What was the one that, and it felt so good?
The Colonial Army, maybe?
I just don't
The
remember.
Continental Army, I think.
The one that there was one that was in a game that happened earlier today, which was just fantastic. Which was the French had landed in Rhode Island and were marching on the British position in Boston, and they were just there's no way they could win. They were so outgunned, it was horrific. And then it just magically the British player got off their lowest battle card, which is Battle Long Island, where the Continentals basically don't get to roll dice. They roll half their dice with getting rid of the better ones first, and they just obliterated the French. And that was the beginning, and they came massive comeback and won by 2 points. And so those low cards, when you
when you can
they're
get
not
them off,
often,
they're
but when
very
they happen,
interesting.
Yes,
huge.
yes.
I got one to go off. I don't remember which one it was, but it was very powerful.
Yeah, well, and but I also liked even because the way the trumps work, if you can trump, you do it with a card that's lower, and whilst you don't get the event, you still get a ton of actions off of them as well.
Yeah.
And it's just like that always feels good when you can make that work. I think one of the things I love about trick taking is, yeah, you're at the mercy of the hand that you draw. But I feel like you're using those and picking the order of those to try to really. It feels like I'm imposing my will on this.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about trick taking. I don't know if I'm any good at it, but that's what it feels like I'm trying to do. Instead of I don't know, like a hex encounter, it's like move my guys here, move my guys here. You're just moving guys, which is great. That's wonderful, but. There's something about trick taking, like you said, even in Hearts, where you're just like, okay, I'm going to do this to try and get you to waste that so I can use this lower one, but you've wasted your good ones there, and like trying to like force your opponent into things they don't want to do, and then you'll mess it up, and then that pendulum swings back, and you're like, ugh, and you're on the receiving end of that. That's such a neat feeling, and to have that back into a war game is really enjoyable, and this was really good.
And I very much enjoyed the mulligan part of the drawing your. I thought that was very well done. It's 5 cards of
It's
the
up to
10,
5, yeah.
and that's a lot. But sometimes that's the difference between a good round and a really bad round. And I also like that you don't throw those in your discard; they go back in your deck.
Yeah.
So you're really just pushing the bad stuff down the line in many ways. But it can be good too, depending on when it comes out.
Yeah.
It's just. I was hesitant with that at first, but once I saw it in action, I was like, oh, I'm starting to finally catch on to why that is a key.
There's certainly a burn of knowledge to that, where it's once you know that you're like, this is not the time for this card, but I think it will be,
In next round,
next year.
2 rounds.
So this was really enjoyable to play. When can we perhaps expect to see this as something that everyone else could get their hands on?
So
Not even announced on P500.
it's
yet.
not announced on P500. This is a bit down the line. I'm hoping that this will be up maybe in a year.
Okay.
But it's at a point where it doesn't really require that. I mean, there's some development required on it. Obviously,
Art.
my graphic design is
It's not very
not
don't
great.
look, don't
but
look.
It's very functional.
yeah, it's functional.
Yeah.
That's generous. But But yet there's some stuff that still needs to be done. But it doesn't really require that much. And the beautiful thing about this type of game is it doesn't actually require much in the way of actual art and illustrations because so much of it is freely available.
Right.
Well, actually, what you used here is very
Yes,
good.
Yeah.
agreed.
But yeah, so I'm hoping for about a year.
And you already mentioned that there's other designers you've talked to that would love to use this.
Yes, and so
To fight.
which is awesome.
Yeah, that's
like
cool.
again, it's all of this is contingent on people actually getting in their hands and liking it. But provided they do, there's a lot that I and other people want to do with this system. So
Well, we're very grateful that you kind of sat down, taught us, and we were able to play the whole game. It was really awesome. And appreciate you sitting down on camera with us and kind of going through some of the bits and pieces.
my pleasure.
And very grateful for everyone for tuning in. I've been Alexander with theplayers8.com.
And I'm Grant.
And I'm Sam London.